Welcome back, everybody. It's Rich here at nearing the end of 2021. And in this video, I want to take a look back at what it's cost me to run my garage of 6 sports cars. Well, 5 sports cars and a Shogun Sport. I'm going to look at what I bought, what I sold, maintenance costs, whether that's scheduled maintenance or repairs or upgrading at times, and then total it all up and give you a cost and an indication of what it costs to run these 6 cars. So 3 cars left the garage this year and 3 cars joined the garage. So I started with 6, ended up with 6. 6 for me is just about a manageable number. And it's not just about the financial commitment of running 6 cars, it's also about space, because you obviously can't drive 6 cars at the same time, so there's going to be periods where some cars don't get used. And ideally you want that indoor space, whether that's garage, units or whatever, but you just have more problems if you store vehicles for long periods of time outside. So, and it's also about space. So for me, 6 is the right sort of number, and it's financially viable at that number. So 3 cars left, 3 cars joined. The ones that left, I had the Mercedes 350e plug-in hybrid. So that was my new car. That was the family car that I let go in March. Why did I let that go? Well, it was a company car that was costing an awful lot in benefit in kind tax, and I took the cash payments instead. It was pain-free driving, but it came at a huge financial burden being such a new modern car. Then in the summer, I let go of my 2 convertibles, my exec convertibles really. First was the Porsche Boxster S, the 987 Gen 1, 2005. That was sold, and then a month later, I sold the car that I never said I'd sell, which was the Mercedes SL 500 R230, 2003 that was. And very briefly, the reasons for selling the Porsche and the SL500 was purely down to running costs, and you'll certainly see that the Porsche and the SL, specifically the SL500, were and still are very, very expensive cars to run and maintain, especially when you're looking across 6 cars. It was just too much of a financial burden for me at that time. That's why I let those 2 cars go. So they were the 3 that all left. 3 that joined. The first one that joined was my Renault Sport Megane 250 Cup. Bought that in March, really as a everyday car. Could you run a 250 Cup as an everyday car? Plus I wanted it as my track toy as well, and I'll come on to what I did with regard to the RS Megane. And then in the summer, as a replacement for both the SL and the Boxster, I wanted some iconic car. So although you can't see it, but I'll take the cover off in a minute. Under that cover there is my 2005 wide track Subaru Impreza WRX STI Blob-eye in there. That was my indulgence buy really, because I wanted to have that 4-wheel drive iconic turbocharged Subaru. And then just a couple of months ago, September, October time, I went and got, as another sort of 2-seater roadster type of car to really back up and protect the little MX-5, I got myself a 6-cylinder Z3, bang for buck, great value, and we'll come on to costs associated with that. So they were the ins and outs. So now I'm going to do is have a look at the maintenance costs associated with each of the 6 cars. Obviously some have only been here a few months, but I'm going to start with the 3 that have survived the whole of 2021 with the garage. So let's start with, I think, the little MX-5 in the far corner. So my little Mark 1 MX-5 NA 1.8, it's a Unos Roadster, so it's an import, Jap import. Picked it up about 2.5 years ago. Really is a bit of a cheap run around. Paid 900 for it actually, that's all. And these now are definitely going up in value, if not particularly quick, but this is a really good one. It's been garaged for all its life in the UK, and you can see that with the lack of rust on it, etc. But just look at some numbers then for the MX-5. It's currently sat on 132,000 kilometres. So that works out about 82,000 miles. That's all it's on. So that actually, I think that's my lowest mileage car in the garage, and it's the oldest. Really good condition. The only problem is it's got the red fading on different panels, but that's just cosmetical. It runs really great. And the best thing for this year is running costs. A grand total of £35 in total for maintenance of the MX-5. Reason being, that £35 was for the MOT, which it went through with just one advisory, which was a slight seep on one of the dampers. But otherwise, it's not cost me a penny. It's carrying one fault, which is the fuel gauge fault. That did cause a few issues at the start of the year when the missus ran out of fuel and I didn't tell her that the fuel gauge wasn't working, which I'd known about since the summer before. So anyway, one fault, £35. It's only done about 12 or 1,300 miles, so just over 1,000 miles this year. So it's been lightly used. There was no great road trips. Really want to plan something again in 2022 for this. Probably the car that I don't really want to sell. If nothing other than it's got pop-up headlights. What don't you like about 80s, 90s cars with pop-up headlights? Cheapest chips, £35. Absolutely, for the whole year. And the good thing about MX-5s, they're simple to work on. So most of the maintenance, most of the work on this car, I do myself. I do need to do an oil change. It's had the plugs, it's had the HT leads from the year before. So that's simply just an oil change next year, which I'll do. Cheapest chips, great fun. Let's take a look at the next car that's been here, which I'll go along to the Clio Sport in the end garage, and we'll see how much that's cost during 2021. So the Clio Sport 182, just so you can at least see the car, it is in absolutely amazing condition, this car. It's not done many miles, I have to say. So currently, on the clock, it's 117,000. I bought it with 114,000 on back in September of 2020. So I've had it about 15, 16 months. This year, it's only done about 2,000 miles. And I've done a few videos on it throughout the year, which you can check out. It's one of those cars, again, it reminds me, it almost drives like a 90s car, to tell you the truth. It's rattly, it's lightweight, fizzing, normally aspirated engine. Fantastic, but what's it cost to run for the year? Total cost for this, it's had no service. So it had its MOT, which was £35. It's got one advisory, or two advisories, but for both front tyres. So both front tyres are right down or very close to the limit, legal limit. I've not changed them yet, so they will need to be done. Michelin Pilot Sports are on it. So that'll have to be done in the new year when I bring it back out. But otherwise, what else have I had done to it? It had the ECU engine light came on in the summer, ran like it dropped a cylinder, plugged in my diagnostics reader, came up with a fuel injector fault. So I ended up replacing all four fuel injectors, 130-ish pounds for that. Did it all myself. There's a video up there, which I'll put a link to, for you to have a look at. That fixed that problem. And then literally, it was a fiver because some of the boot lid, the car's locked unfortunately, but inside the boot, there's a plastic indoor cover, plastic clips come off, they rattle around, £5 from eBay, a bag of 10, clip them all back on, and that was it. So £170 all year, that's all I've spent on the Clio. Now, it will need a service next year because it's been about 18 months, maybe, 18 months since it's had its last service. So really, I want to get that serviced sometime next year. And in 2023, there's the cam belt. Cam belt's a big cost of one of these, probably £700 or £800. So that'll have to be budgeted in if I've still got it in 12 months' time. But fantastic car, love it to bits, and that's the Clio 182. Again, absolutely cheap as chips. Next car is the Shogun Sport. Let's take a look. So here's the Shogun Sport. This is used most days. It's probably, well, it's not probably, it is, has the hardest life. Most days, not particularly long journeys, would generally do them. Most of the short journeys, full of all sorts of hard life, runs to the recycling with rubbish, dogs, horses, all that sort of towing, all that sort of stuff that 4x4s are really good at doing. It's done about 5,000 miles in the year. It's sat on 107,000 at the moment, the Shogun Sport. And what's it cost me? Well, it went through its MOT again, straight through, other than one advisory, which was a brake pipe was corroded. Battery, I'm pointing here, you obviously can't see it, but the battery's there. That was about £100 for a replacement battery midway through the year. And I also had a rear brake caliper and the rear pads doing at the start of the year, and that was £200. So again, total there is £335 for the year to run this. Again, the benefit with something like this, absolutely Japanese 4x4s, they're just fantastic. You can use them, abuse them, and a lot of work you can do yourself. Again, it's not rocket science cars like this. So again, if you're useful with some basic tools, you can do a lot of the maintenance and keep the running costs down. So they were the 3 cars that I've kept for the whole year, and as you agree, they were all cheap as chips to run. Now we'll start to talk about some of the other cars and where some of these cars are not so cheap. If we look at the cars that were new this year, and I'm going to start with the most costly, the Megane 250 Cup. So next up is my Megane 2010 Megane RS 250 Cup. Before I tell you the number, and it's a pretty big number, I have to say, for the Megane, is I think I need to just paint the picture. I bought this car well under book value. In fact, I bought it off a good friend whose parents had owned it before, so I knew the last two owners. It was on 110,000 miles at the time, so it was quite a high mileage for a Megane Sport. But I have to say, it's cost me probably more than I even thought when I bought it. But I bought it for probably half value, that was all. I've done about 10,000 miles in it since March when I bought the car. So it's probably averaging about 12,000 a year. That's what I'm sort of looking at the moment. And the costs, well, it went through an MOT, which was straight through. I had the wheels refurbed, which I'm going to include. That was £280 for these 19-inch wheels. And then it was due the cam belt. So this is the 5 or I think it may be 6 years, but a lot of people go with 5 years. I had the cam belt done. Cam belt, took it to an RS specialist up in the West Midlands, 4 Ashes. And that base price for the cam belt, including water pump, dephaser, etc., is just over £600. But I had a full service on top of that. Plus, I had brake fluid, I had rear brakes done, I had suspension top mounts, I had wheel bearings. That came to a big price, just over £2,000 I spent up there. That was about April, May time. I then went track daying it. So I updated the front discs with Brembo's plain, not groove, but plain Brembo front discs and PBS Pro Race pads. That was £380, which I did myself to keep some of the costs down. I also fitted Castrol SRF brake fluid, again about £60 for a little small tub. That had to be fitted, and then I also need to replace the rear brake pads again due to some of the track use. So all in all, over £3,100 I have spent on the Megane this year. Now, that to some people that's a lot of money. I was thinking 1,500. It's doubled what I expected. Some of it is because of track use. Some of it is because of aesthetics, i.e. the alloys. Some of it you had to do because of servicing and cam belts, and others were emerging, like the suspension, top mounts, wheel bearings, etc. So, but I did get it for probably half market value. So that's compensated for me spending £3,000 on it. But I'm hoping next year is a much cheaper year for the Megane, as I've put so much into that car in 2021. Let's take a look now at the STI in below you. So let me just lift this, at least you can see the car. I always keep covers on because otherwise they get really, really dusty. But that's the that's my Impreza. As you can see, it's been on axle stands for flipping the last 6 weeks, waiting for all the suspension components coming in, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So this car, bought it in August this year, so I've only owned it for 3 or 4 months. It's done about 1,000 miles in that time. It's developed a knocking noise, which there's a video on up here somewhere about why I found out what was the problem. And I decided to, well, the top mounts needed replacing, which I decided to do myself. But then when I took the suspension struts off, the condition of the struts looked really bad. And then I've gone through a whole journey, which I'll come on to in another later video, about replacement struts, dampers, springs, top mounts, bump stops, everything that goes with basically with regards to a suspension. So at the moment, I have costed up all that, the 2 new suspension units as a whole, about £600. So that will include brand new KYB, OEM spec KYB, dampers, springs, not quite OEM but very close, bump stops and OEM top mounts as well. I'm going to do I'm going to do all the work myself, I hope, to keep the cost down, but that's about £600 so far that I've paid out on the Scooby. And I say it's only done 1,000 miles. So that's relatively low cost, and I'm hoping it stays that way. Although it was serviced just over a year ago, so when that comes back out in the spring, I do want to get that serviced. So that's the STI, and then the final one of the new cars that joined the garage is my little Z3. So who doesn't love a little Z3? I just think they're cracking buys at the moment. If nothing more than if you buy one of the 6-cylinder BMW engines, flipping brilliant engines, wrapped in these bodies. I know they're a bit of a concoction between E30 and E36, but great little cars, the Z3s. Only owned it a few months, so it's not had an MOT. The only thing it's suffered with so far, well, a couple of things it's suffered with, so a couple of things that I need to investigate. One is brakes, under braking, steering wheel is starting to shake and shudder. The pads looked okay with the wheels on, but once I jacked it up, took the wheels off, because the sliding calipers at the front, the sliding part, you looked on the inside of the pad, absolutely shot to pieces. There's no pad left, that's why it's warped the disc, that's why there's the shuddering. So I've just bought from Eurocar Parts, standard Brembo, pads and discs for the front, £94. I'm going to do it probably in the next couple of weeks, certainly over the Christmas period, and that'll resolve the brakes issue. Again, dirt cheap, cheapest chips there, no other cost associated with it, and so that's a nice easy one. So let me talk about now the 2 cars that I sold, and the running costs associated with the Porsche Boxster and the SL 500 earlier this year. So these 2 cars, I'll do the Porsche Boxster first. That went in June, so I only owned it for the first 6 months of the year. But in that time, there was a coolant seep on the crossover pipes, so they had to be done, plus MOT, plus a gearbox oil change, because there was no proof that it had never been done before, and that was £850. And then I also had a gearbox issue with the Tiptronic gearbox, something to do with the selector switch, at £385. So the Boxster cost me around about £1,200 up to when I sold it in June. So as you can see there, quite expensive, and certainly the Porsches, it was quite an expensive car to run. And then the final car was the SL 500. I owned that up until July, so I had that for sort of 7 months of the year. And in there, it had a service and an MOT, which was £320. And then it suffered an ABC fault, active body control fault, flipping hydraulic suspension system, hugely complex, hugely expensive. As soon as you break into the system, it's just man hours just go through the roof. Really expensive parts. That was, and I can't remember what the fault was because I've not got any of the paperwork, because obviously I've sold the car. That was £1,300 before I sold it. A right hit in the chest. So a total of £1,620. Just shows you the cost associated with the Boxster and the SL 500. So that's it for maintenance costs, and that's just over £7,000, about £7,200 associated with all the cars that I've owned at some point during 2021. But as I say, it's always been around 6 I've owned. You then add on insurance. My insurance is, give or take, about £100 a month for all my 6 cars, fully comprehensive. And that's probably because I'm quite an old type of guy. That's probably why I get it at, I think, a reasonable rate, and it's quite a flexible insurance company. And then with road tax, because I don't have these taxed all the time, I normally only have half of them taxed, then it's about £1,000 for road tax. So in total, including road tax, insurance, maintenance, repairs, everything all in, just excluding fuel obviously, it's just over £9,000 or £9,500, £9,400 I've calculated it out at. That's a lot more than last year. Last year I think it was around about 5,500, so it's significantly more. I think, and that's what you'd expect, peaks and troughs. But for me, what was interesting is the cars that I've decided to keep, the Mark 1 MX-5, the Clio Sport, the Shogun Sport, absolutely cheap as chips to run. I expect the Megane actually next year to be cheap as chips, because I've done everything that's needed to be done now with that car, and the simple things I'll be able to do a lot of them myself, other than just the servicing, because I want to keep the full service history there. But other cars have cost a lot. Say the SL500, the Porsche Boxster, they were 2 reasons I've got rid of those, but just because the servicing costs and repair costs of those cars were just so expensive. I suppose my final point on this is, and it's the cost that you don't see, and potentially for a lot of people is the biggest cost of any associated ownership of a car, is depreciation, or, as is the case, appreciation. So the only way to know whether your car is depreciated and by how much, or whether in fact it's appreciated, is when you sell it, and then you look at what you bought it for and what you sold it for. Well, a couple of scenarios then for the 2 cars that I did sell this year. The Porsche Boxster sold for £3,000 more than I paid for it. Now that was largely, probably I bought well, but I think the market was favourable from from a selling perspective this year, because everybody knows how buoyant the second-hand car market's been this year. But that £3,000 appreciation, considering I've used the car for 10 to 15,000 miles over its 2 years, and then still made £3,000, that £3,000 offset most, nearly all, but not quite, almost all of the maintenance costs associated with my Porsche over the 2 years. So that £3,000 in credit. The SL500, not quite as good story, but I owned the SL for over 4 years, and when I came to sell that, I lost £750. Now that, in depreciation terms, is absolutely nothing. When you could jump in any sort of new or newish car, some will lose that in a month or two. So, and I had that for over 4 years, did 30,000 miles in that SL500, and I lost 750 quid. The problem with the SL was just the flipping running costs were just too expensive. As for the cars that I've had this year, and this is another way I look at offsetting it. So actually, in buying and selling, I've actually made, in theory, £2,250, which can offset some of my £9,400 that I've spent maintaining them. So I think a fair assessment actually is, I feel financially I'm in a position that this year's cost me about £7,000 to run the garage of 6 cars. That to me is a fair assessment. And then more subjectively, the second point I suppose is on valuations of the current cars as well. They're all older cars. The Meganes seem to be hit the floor really. I don't think they've got anywhere this year. £8,000 seems to be the floor of the Megane Sports. Mark 1 MX-5s, they're getting rarer now. Getting one really below 3k is not that easy unless it's full of rusty holes. Impreza STIs, I haven't owned it long enough, so I don't know what's going to happen with those. They've certainly been appreciated over the last couple of years. Whether they continue or not is subjective. I personally think they will, because the Japanese performance cars always do well once they've hit that sort of 15-year mark. The Clio Sport 182, I paid 2,300 for that 15 months ago. That's got to be worth 3 to 4k now of anybody's money, especially in that condition with that service history. Again, it's a good steady burner, I think, as far as appreciation is concerned. The Shogun Sport, again, they're at the floor. It's 2 to 3k for a Shogun Sport. You can't really get anything much below that unless it's a real bag of nails, or you're very fortunate, because people just don't sell them. And I still think my little Z3 that I bought is a real bargain at the moment. If you want a cheap 6-cylinder roadster, then for me I wouldn't look no further than a Z3. And so I look across the garage and I don't see much depreciation on any of my cars. And with a bit of luck, if some of them appreciate, it can offset some of the running costs associated with running 6 cars. And that's depreciation. Depreciation is always, it's either the silent enemy, or if you use it to your favour, it can help with maintenance costs because it can offset some of the maintenance costs. There you go, a whistle-stop run through my 6 cars, running costs for 2021. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please thumbs up, please subscribe somewhere down here, and stay tuned. There'll be another video coming up very, very soon.